nirasya sarva sandeham ekikritya sudarshanam prakashita rahasyam tam bhajami gurumishwaram nama shrestam manumapi shatriputramatra swarupam rupam tasyagrajamurupurim maturim kushtavatim radha kundam girivaramaho radhikamadavasham prapto yasya pratita kripaya shri gurum tam natosmi Shri Govinda Pararavinda Marupananya Bhilashojitam Purna Prema Rasutsavo Jalamano Vritti Prasannananan Shajvad Krishna Katha Mahamrita Payo Rasho Mudake Dato Bande Bhagavatani Mananudabam Murdna Nipatyakshitu Namo Mahavaranyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gaura Tvishe Namah Jayatam Surato Pangor Mama Mandamate Gati Matsarvasva Padam Bhojo Radha Madana Mohano Kuladi Devatamor Madana Mohan Jar Seva Raghunatha Rup Sanatan Jaya Rupa Sanatana Bhatta Raghunath Shri Jiva Gopala Bhatta Dasa Raghunath Echai Goshai Kori Charana Bandhan Jaha Hoite Vignanasha Bhishta Puran Adadana-strinam dantoy yacheham puna puna Srimad Rupa Parambojo Dhulisyam Janma Janmani. So by the grace of Shri Kali Yuga Pavana, the Svabhajana Vibhajana, Prayojana Bhatar, Prema Purushottam, Karuna Mahasagar, Swanamamrita aswadan kari, Swabhavamrita aswadan kari, Swamadhuryamrita aswadan kari, Sri Gauranga Mahaprabhu and his beloved Parshad, the crest jewel of Gaudiya Vaishnava Acharya's, he by whom Mahaprabhu's heart's desire was fulfilled in this world, Sri Rupa Gosvami Pad. Again, today we will continue our discussion of Sri Rupa Pad's Padyavali, and we're hopefully going to finish our discussion of verse 14 today. So this is the fifth segment of discussing this verse, and specifically the topic of laulyam, and how this is the only price by which kṛṣṇa-bhakti-rasa, or the experience thereof, namely Raganuga-bhakti, can be achieved. So the verse under discussion said, kṛṣṇa-bhakti-rasa-bhāvitā matiḥ krīyatāṁ yadi kuto'pi labhyate. If available anywhere, purchase this awareness imbued with kṛṣṇa-bhakti-rasa. So to purchase it, what is the price? Tatra mūlyam, tatra mūlyam api laulyam ekalaṁ. The only price is hankering. So in our last discussion, we discussed what to do when you don't have any money. Or in other words, when you don't have this hankering, or when you have very little of it, then what to do. If you have to purchase this very wonderful thing and you have the money, well then, all right. But what do you do when you don't have the money? How do you get the money? So in the last class, we discussed Jiva Gosvami Pad's instruction about how sadhakas in whom such taste or in whom such laulyam has not emerged or has not matured and become strong, how they can practice Raganuga sadhana bhakti in conjunction with Vaidhi bhakti in a manner that is conducive to the nourishment and the strengthening of such taste or of such desire. So we spoke about that advice of Jiva Gosvami, and then we came to the point in the Sindhu of Rupa Gosvami where he explains that this lobha or this intense desire grows or develops from hearing about the sweetness of that desired object, of the bhava of Krishna's dear ones in Braja and their other acts, services, characteristics, and so forth. And then we discussed an analysis given by Radhakrishna Das Goswami in his Dashloki Bhashyam, where he breaks all of the various types of sadhana as per the 64 given in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu into 5 categories. And a category of what is contrary or sadhanas that lead to another objective and therefore are best to be omitted or not practiced by a sadhaka of this path. Then sadhanas that are neutral, in other words, that are accessible but not directly or specifically related to the precise object of the sadhaka's sadhana. Then a category called vijatiya sadhanas, which are akin to the object but contain still some dissimilarity. So, in other words, hearing about or sadhana related to Brajadham, related to Brajabhav, but not of the specific order of bhava that is the object of one's sadhana. Then he came to a 4th category of sajatiya sadhana, or sadhana that is of the same type, but yet not of the same subtype, or not precisely the same, but largely similar. And the example was given of the difference between what's called sambhoge chatmika or Raganuga-bhakti and what is known as tad-tad bhav echatmika Raganuga-bhakti, which in the modern day is popularly referred to by the term manjari bhava. So, whether you use Rupa Goswami's technical term or a popular modern term to refer to it, in either case, there's a distinction between those who aspire to assist a Nayika, principally Radharani, in her service to Krishna, and those who have the aspiration to serve Krishna as a Nayika. So that would be Sajatiya, in that it's not precisely the same as one's object, but it's of the same general category. In this case, it's of the nature of Madhura Rati. And then finally, we had the 5th category of the Sviya sadhanas, or the sadhanas that are precisely on the topic of the bhava that one aspires to attain. And within them, he gave a further set of subcategories in which hearing narrations of the Leela related to that particular bhava, or in other words, Leelas of one's Ishta Devata that involve service, activity, expression related specifically to that bhava, that will be the foremost nourishing form of sadhana for the strengthening of this desire. And secondly, rendering service either within the mind or the body in that manner or in that spirit, that will be of the middle grade of this highest category. And to reside in Vraja will be also of this highest category, but in the 3rd position. So this was Radhakrishna Das Goswami's analysis of how all these sadhanas, none of them lead to or produce or create the object that's sought to be attained, namely this prema seva, or the ragatmika bhakti. But it is only this, in the words of Kaviraj Goswami, ghada lolya, or this intense hankering, that is what makes the thing attainable, or what inspires Krishna to bless one with it. And all of these sadhanas are hankering generators, or ideally are performed in a way that leads to the generation of this, or intensification of this hankering, or this taste, or this desire, however you want to describe it. We've seen the same different terms used here in the Padyavali, in the words of Rupa Goswami, in the words of Jiva Goswami. So we left off last time with this point that the general strategy, if you will, in the course of sadhana is to engage in sadhana which is most efficient in leading to the attainment of the goal. So therefore this analysis of Radhakrishna-das Goswami gives sadhakas an understanding of what will be the most efficient, focused, precise manner that they can proceed in their practice. So now we're going to hear a little bit more about this most favorable of all types of sadhana that he identifies through this analysis of hearing about Krishna's Leela with those dear ones that have this bhava that is the object of one's aspiration. So I'm going to pick up from where we left off, and we'll look at some further points he makes to stress this central point. So, quote, "The overall point is thus that those sadhanas that are the most conducive to the generation of intense desire are to be made most prominent in one's sadhana, so that intense desire can be nourished as far as possible. The contrary or viruddha sadhanas, moreover, are not meant to be practiced at all by Raganuga-bhakti sadhaka. Furthermore, since attachment to hearing narrations of the Leela of one's Ishta Devata is categorized as the best practice even among the highest category of sadhanas, namely the self-same or sviya sadhanas, this practice of hearing is to be regarded as the most important and central practice within the process of Raganuga-bhakti." There's a typo. And this is why Sri Rupa Pada explains in Sri Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu that in essence it is by hearing that intense desire arises. Quote, "Upon hearing of the sweetness of their," meaning Ragatmika Bhaktas, bhavas and so forth, "that the mind depends neither upon injunctions nor upon reasoning to flow towards one of those bhavas, is the characteristic of the arising of intense desire in this regard." So this is sort of putting all of this analysis into action to show all the thought that went into this statement that we already heard earlier of Rupa Goswami, and why he specifically speaks of hearing of the sweetness of their bhavas as being the thing that brings about the arising or that is associated with the definition of the presence of lobha. So now Radhakrishna-das Goswami, he draws out more significance from the manner in which Rupa Goswami has written a further verse that follows this. The Goswami further explains that Sri Rupa Pada underscores this teaching by speaking of, quote, "one absorbed in narrations of Sri Krishna and his companion of one's own longing, as the agent who performs Raganuga-bhakti sadhana, in his similar summary of the Raganuga sadhana bhakti process. Quote, remembering beloved Krishna and his companion of one's longing, one absorbed in narrations of them should always dwell in Braja." So this is one of the two verses that Rupa Goswami states in terms of direct practices or practical instructions for what a Raganuga sadhaka does. And following this and the following statement, he says, and all these 64 limbs that I mentioned earlier that are found in Vaidhi Bhakti, those are also part of, or can be part of, Raganuga-bhakti. And that's all he says. He doesn't go into further or more elaborate detail about the practices. So what's very, very significant here is the grammatical construction in which he has written these two precious, precise instructions about the process of Raganuga-bhakti. Quote, this is to say that the grammatical construction of the sentence in this verse, wherein, quote, one absorbed in narrations, or kotha rata, is the agent of the actions mentioned in the verse of remembering Sri Krishna and his associate and residing in Braja, itself shows that hearing about the bhava and lila, that is the desired object of one's Raganuga sadhana, is fundamental to all the other practices recommended for a sadhaka. Sri Jiva Pad also explains in his commentary here that the aforementioned processes of seeing the deity form of Sri Bhagavan and his associates and so forth, that are also said to be generative of intense desire in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu 2.3.300, and is also mentioned in the Bhakti Sar Pradarshani on Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu 1.2.6, and other passages, are dependent upon the process of hearing, whereas the hearing process is independent, meaning one can acquire intense desire for the desired object just by hearing about it, even if one does not have the opportunity to behold deity forms of Sri Bhagavan and his associates that are expressive of the bhava one aspires to, or engage in various other practices. So in gist, the more one hears about that desired object, learns to appreciate the desired object, and engages in various other sadhanas, such as the aforementioned meditation upon oneself engaged in various services as a resident of Braja, as supportive functions that are dependent upon that hearing and serve to further nourish one's desire for what one has heard about, the stronger one's desire for that object can become. So, just to recap, by writing this statement, kota rata, or saying the person who is kota rata, who is engaged in or attached to or hearing about these narrations, these discussions of this bhava, of these parikaras, that person will then do smaran, or that person will then do seva with the sadhaka deha, seva with the siddha deha, that person will reside in vraja, that person will engage in the various other types of sadhana. So by making the listener the agent of every other single type of sadhana, it shows that if you're not first of all a listener, you're not the one who's being instructed to do any of these sadhanas. So that underscores the centrality and the dependence upon hearing of all other types of sadhana. And this is something that Jiva Gosvami speaks about more broadly in relation to all processes of bhakti and Vaidhi bhakti as a whole, saying that Raganuga-bhakti is the nirapeksha sadhana, or it's the independent sadhana. You can achieve siddhi just by hearing. And to do kirtan, to do smaran, to do archan, to do any other type of sadhana presupposes that one has done some degree of hearing, shravana. So every other sadhana process is dependent upon hearing. But hearing is independent of any other process and itself has the power to lead to all success. Though, certainly, can be combined with kirtan, smaran, and so forth. So this point is what's being stressed here by Radhakrishnadas Goswami, and what's further stressed in this commentary I've cited here of Jiva Goswami, where he speaks of, specifically also in the context of Raganuga-bhakti, this hearing as being the independently capable function that leads to the development of the eligibility, the adhikar, the desire. And it's on the strength of that acquired eligibility, or the strength of that desire, that these other processes can be performed accurately, appropriately, etc. Because we know that the process of smaran is dependent upon antakarana shuddhi, or chitta shuddhi. One can try to meditate, but if one's chitta or one's psyche is, very contaminated, one won't have much success. So the hearing process is ideal for persons who lack the capacity to meditate greatly, because it requires less a state of pre-existent mental purity in order to hear and focus upon what one is hearing than it does to engage directly in meditation. So the hearing process is more apt for persons of a lesser degree of chitta shuddhi, and is more necessary for persons who are in the earlier stages anyway, because one can't meditate on anything that they haven't already first learned about by hearing about it. So the extent to which one hears, the extent to which one refines one's understanding, that itself will inform the quality of any meditation that one does, and that hearing process will also purify the mind, whereby one will become more capable of executing the meditational act. So in this way, we want to emphasize that this process of hearing, this lila of Krishna with his dear ones of Braja, and specifically those who have the bhava one aspires to, is the central, foremost practice and dependent practice upon which all other practices are dependent in this path of Raganuga sadhana bhakti. So, again, it was explained that only by hankering can this goal be achieved. And this hankering is achieved principally by hearing, and by the other activities that one may or to some extent may not engage in on the basis of that hearing. So what do you do when you want to buy the most precious thing in the shop and you have no money at all? How do you start to acquire some wealth? This is how you do it. You start hearing about it. You start learning about it and purifying the mind in the process of doing so. And that will then lead to the formation of samskaras in the mind from this, kinchit anubhuta, or this experience to some extent of the desired object by means of hearing about it. And in this way, the mind will gradually start to become more and more fixed upon it and become purged of interests, attachments to other objects. So, in gist, if the, quote, only price is hankering, then this is how you acquire that wealth, or this is how you acquire that hankering, by this hearing process and by, attuned forms of kirtan, smaran, etc. that are based on and closely integrated with that content that one hears about. So, it is thus in this sense that the one and only price, or mūlyam, namely hankering for awareness imbued with kṛṣṇa-bhakti-rasa, can be acquired, and thereby that awareness itself, namely ragatmika bhakti. An underlying principle at play in these conclusions is that desire for any object is predicated upon knowledge of the object, since one cannot desire something that one has no conception of. And what one actually desires is determined by the conception of the object one has in one's mind, more so than the object itself. So there's a statement in the Mahabharata related to this, which says, desire for an object shall be preceded by knowledge of the object, aim for an object preceded by desire for it, and action to attain it preceded by the aim for it. Then the result, the basis of which is the action, occurs. So this is giving a universal progression. This is just a generic statement from the Mahabharata, but we can see that this general theory applies specifically to Raganuga-bhakti. So how do you achieve something? You achieve it by performing an action that leads to the attainment of it. But what is it that brings about someone performing that action? They have to have first set an aim or formed a resolve to say, I want to achieve this. And they will only make that resolve when they feel a desire for this. And they will only desire the thing when they have some knowledge about what it is. So until and unless someone acquires awareness that something exists and acquires awareness of its characteristics, one won't have any desire for it. And without the desire, one won't form the resolve. Without the resolve, one won't perform the action. And without the action, one won't attain the object. So the hearing process gives us that knowledge that then creates the psychological prerequisites for desire to grow in the psyche. And we can see in practical life that this can happen, this same process unfolds, whereby we might go to the supermarket and there's so many products in the supermarket and we might see many of them, but we don't have any knowledge of them. And so we don't desire them, we just walk past them. If we go to some aisle with foods from other parts of the world and we see some vegetables that we've never seen before, that we've never eaten, we don't know what they are, we don't know how to cook them, we don't really feel inclined to eat them, we just ignore them. But if you ever happen to meet someone who happens to be from that region and then you learn how those foods are cooked, then suddenly you realize, oh, this is actually great, and this is nice, and then you desire that thing, and then you go buy it at the supermarket one day, and, like this, just as a simple practical example, until you acquire knowledge of an object, you don't desire it. But once you have the ability to know what are its characteristics, what is its value, what is the experience that it can produce, then desire for it emerges. So similarly, who is Krishna? What is Vrindavan? What is bhakti? What is prema? The more that we learn what these things are, the more that we hear about them, the more we can desire them, and the more we can desire them for what they really are. Because from practical life, we can also experience that we can also desire something based on a misunderstanding of what it is. We can also, wish for something thinking it will be good, and after we get it, we realize it's bad. People become drug addicts thinking, I want to take this drug, it'll make me happy, and it ends up destroying their life. So if they really had knowledge of what the effect of taking that drug was, they wouldn't have done it, but they didn't have proper knowledge. So they desired something out of a misconception of what it was. So the reason I bring up that example is to say that what we're motivated by is actually more the conception we have of an object than the actual inherent properties of the object. So if we quote-unquote desire Krishna, what we're desiring is whatever level of understanding or experience we've had of him. So rather than sitting with a generic degree of idea and experience of him and then trying to do a bunch of extreme practices on the basis of that, why not refine and refresh the clarity, the depth, the accuracy of what he actually is, of what we're actually desiring, and then let the beauty, the quality, the merit of his actual nature inspire a greater intensification of desire within us. That will be fail-safe on both sides, because it will automatically produce a stronger degree of focus, willpower, etc. from the practical end, and it will actually ensure that what we're aiming towards, what we're aspiring to, is an accurate, worthwhile aim to pursue. So in this way, we can also appreciate how fundamentally and pervasively important this process of hearing is, and by extension, the content that's heard, or in other words, the value of the Bhagavatam, these commentaries on the Bhagavatam, these derivative works from the Bhagavatam written by our Goswamis. This is, the life breath of what this whole culture is. So, in this sense, we can further appreciate the importance or the central role of hearing. So, I'll move on. Thus, the stress given here by Sri Rupa and Sri Jiva fundamentally, above all, upon hearing about the Bhava, Leela, and so forth of Sri Krishna and his Ragatmika associates, is predicated upon the importance of having a clear understanding of them. To the extent one's conception of them is attuned to their divine nature, to that extent one's practices of meditation and the like shall directly nourish desire for them as they exist in truth. Lastly, it should also be borne in mind that fundamentally a fortunate person comes in touch with this entire process by which, quote, hankering or intense desire for a particular Ragatmika bhakta's bhava is attained by the grace of Sri Bhagavan or his bhakta. Sri Rupa explains this at the conclusion of his discussion of Raganuga sadhana bhakti as follows, quote, this Raganuga-bhakti, the sole cause of the attainment of which is only the grace of Krishna or his bhakta, is called Pushti Marg by some. Sri Chakravarti Pad comments in this regard as follows, quote, that, namely intense desire, furthermore, is of two types. That the cause of which is the grace of Bhagavan, and that the cause of which is the grace of a bhakta possessed of anurag. Therein, the intense desire, the cause of which is the grace of a bhakta, is of two types, prior and present, The prior type is that arisen from the grace of such a bhakta in a previous birth. The present type is that arisen from the grace of such a bhakta during the period of this birth. When the first type of intense desire, the cause of which is the grace of a bhakta, occurs, taking shelter at the feet of such a guru occurs after the manifestation of intense desire. In the case of the second type of intense desire, the cause of which is the grace of a bhakta, the manifestation of intense desire occurs after taking shelter at the guru's feet. So, when we talk about hearing, we're talking about hearing from a sadhu, principally the guru. We're talking about hearing from someone who can convey the spirit of what's being described. And that process may have happened in a past life, it may not have happened. But in the case of it having happened in the past life, then the samskaras created by that in the past life will certainly be retained in the psyche as one enters this life, and therefore it will be observed that such a person has some quote-unquote natural, in the sense of, residual from a previous life, inclination towards a particular spiritual object. So one will be inspired by, or one will be motivated by that pre-existent conditioning in the psyche, and then will seek out association, sadhu sangha, text, scriptures, etc., that correspond to and that suit the psychological makeup that one has. So in that sense, Chakravarti Pad says that will emerge, or that will be experienced prior to taking shelter in the guru, because if someone actually already has some of this desire, they're going to seek a guru who's a guru of the particular path and manner that they aspire to achieve. But in the case of the opposite, where one doesn't have that type of samskar, doesn't have that type of desire from a past life, where it's getting installed in the psyche, so to speak, in this life, then that will happen, he says here, after taking shelter of the guru. Meaning, one will receive these samskaras, one will receive this grace, one will receive this association from the guru, and that influence will be what brings about or engenders and kindles this desire within the heart. So in all cases, it's a matter of grace that one gets the opportunity to have the association, to engage in the hearing process, and ultimately for this process to unfold whereby the desire is enkindled within the heart. So fundamentally, the ultimate object is given as grace in response to the desire, and the underlying circumstances and means by which the desire is enkindled are also expressions of grace of Bhagavan or his bhakta. So on both ends, fundamentally, it's a grace. And the task, if you will, or the wiggle room is for the sadhaka who receives that initial grace to follow through sincerely on the process, whereby they become fit to receive a further installment or a complete installment of grace in this respect. In regard to this second type, meaning the type in which one takes shelter in the guru, and by the guru's teaching and association, this desire becomes enkindled in the heart, Sri Radhakrishna Das Goswami explains in his Sadhan-dipika that when a guru is taken shelter of, the sweetness of his bhava is attained. Quote, manifestation of that bhava shall occur only by association with a guru who is a dear one of Sri Krishna and not otherwise. When a guru is taken shelter of, the sweetness of his bhava is vividly seen. Thus, when such a guru, who is a form of Sri Krishna, is seen, intense desire arises of its own accord, i.e. automatically, as is described as follows. And he cites a verse from elsewhere in the Sindhu in this regard, which says the following: ever since some person, cleansed by his own tears, his figure adorned with a mass of horripilation, staggering, heart brimming, and trembling very intensely, came into the field of my eyes. I do not know why my mind delights here in the indescribable form of Shyamasundar manifest within my heart and not in my home. So that point in the bracket is given in the commentary. So the overall point here is that in the association of the sadhu, what will be the spirit of that sadhu, what will be that bhava cherished in the heart of the sadhu, it will, using the word that Rupa Goswami used elsewhere, nisyandya, it will ooze, it will permeate, it will flow, it will be evident. Sadhus, no doubt, are of a variety of character. Some are more, what you call gambhir, more sober or somber than others. Some may be more vocal, less vocal. No doubt there's a great variety of scope for individual personality. But the point here is that when one takes shelter in the Guru, when one serves the Guru with trust, when one has a relationship with the Guru, then there will be a natural process by which this is passed on. It will just happen, so to speak. It's not that there's necessarily some, secret tricks to the process. No doubt it is through relationship, it is through time, through trust that a guru may be more vocal or may be more forthcoming about what they may cherish at heart. But at the same time, as this intense desire has been shown by the previous characteristics that we discussed to pervade all the thoughts and behavior of a person who has it, then we can say that just to be in the presence of such a person, just to be in the association of such a person, is itself part of this process by which this is passed on, or by which the sweetness of the bhava cherished in the heart, it can be appreciated, can be perceived to some extent. So another reason I include this passage from the Siddhānta-Dipika is to say that when it really comes down to it practically, the whole process is designed that one takes shelter in a guru who's steeped in one of these bhavas, and by that association with the guru, one comes to become steeped in it oneself. It can be and is meant to be that simple. And, in the modern day where there's a lot of, diverse ideas and not so much clear understanding about how the Goswamis actually designed the system, there are so many people in the social market and, with the guru hat on their head and so many things going on, and it can seem like a jungle. But if we look at the way that this is designed and we look at quotes like this is the simple idea of how the whole process was meant to be. And those who are truly fortunate and truly blessed, they get that opportunity to have that kind of sadhu sangha and have that kind of natural, strong transaction. So, just a little bit more here on this topic to conclude. Thus, it should also be understood that the process of Raganuga-bhakti sadhana is specifically designed to be learned from a qualified guru, the bhava in whose heart can enkindle intense desire for that bhava within one's own. Sri Rupa thus states the following in regard to the sadhana practices related specifically to the guru. And these he gives as the very first of these 64 limbs that he lists. Quote, taking shelter at the feet of a guru, receiving instruction from the guru beginning with Krishna mantra diksha. 3. Serving the guru with trust. The 3 practices beginning with taking shelter at the feet of a guru amongst the 64 listed in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu are said to be principal. So he makes this specific emphasis on these first 3 limbs as being principal or pradhan, meaning without these, the others don't work, or they're not able to actually be practiced as they're designed unless these are properly in place. The implication is that all of their sadhana practices are predicated on aptly performing these 3 fundamental practices and learning all of their sadhana practices from the Guru. In conclusion, it is fundamentally the grace of Sri Bhagavan or his Bhakta, and principally the Guru, that enables one to engage in hearing and other activities that give rise to and nourish intense desire, that is, taste, for the bhava of a particular group of ragatmika bhaktas. And it is such hankering lolya that is the sole price that has to be paid to attain ragatmika bhakti, that is, prema for Sri Bhagavan. In this way, the attainment of prema can be understood to be tremendous, to be a tremendous, rare fortune. And it is for this reason that the compiler cites the verse under discussion in this section about, quote, the fortune of prema, prema subhagya. So, there you have it. That concludes our discussion of verse 14. So, if anyone has any comments or questions, critiques on this topic, please feel free to share. Yes? I don't hear any sound. Okay, I thought I saw a hand. Did I not see a hand?
Okay.
There it is.
Can you hear me better now?
Yeah, now I hear you.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay, good. I'm not sure if I'm the speakers or headset, I don't know. Anyway, so just to recap, laulyam, labha. Laulyam is, we mentioned earlier that laulyam is a fuel for prema. But how, and
sorry,
also,
what was that?
At one point, I think I might...
Lolya was what, sorry?
Laulyam is a fuel for prema. It's earlier it's mentioned, 2 classes back. And yeah, common sense, I can understand it. And how laulyam is related to labha? Is labha like high grade desire of premic bhaktas? And laulyam is the one of sadhakas? Is that right?
Sorry, there was a bit of noise going by. I didn't hear everything you said. Would you mind repeating it?
Question is, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hello? Hello?
Yes.
I'm not sure if I'm being heard. Hello?
I can hear you.
Oh, okay, good. So, referring to 2 classes back, where we mentioned laulyam is a fuel for prema.
Okay, I don't remember saying that.
Labha,
Fuel.
yeah.
I mean, here it's being described as the eligibility for the sadhana.
Okay, yes. But only prema can be obtained by laulyam, right? Prema can be only obtained by laulyam. That's the bottom line of the verse.
Laulyam is the eligibility to engage in the process to achieve the goal of prema.
Mm-hmm. So if the laulyam is there to lead to prema, then labha is another quality of premic bhaktas, ragatmika bhaktas, or is of the same nature?
Well,
the same
in
thing?
the discussion we've had so far, we're just speaking of lobha as per the usage in the Sindhu, and lolya as per the usage in the Padyavali and the Dashloki as synonyms.
Okay.
And in the
I was
case
confused because at one point,
in the case of prem bhaktas, or persons who reach the state of prema, then prema itself is constituted of you could say lolya or lobha of the highest grade.
Oh, okay, understood. Okay. Another case. Okay, so I think I pass on the next question because it may be clear later on. Yeah, thank you.
Sure. All right, well, I think I'll leave it at that for tonight. That's all I didn't plan to go in the next verse because I was worried we wouldn't get this this one done for today. So I'm glad we finished this discussion so that from the next class we can go into the next verse fresh. So I think I'll conclude here, if that's all right. And we have one more verse in this section on Prema Saubhagya, which we'll discuss next time. And then after that, we begin a new prakaran on Nam Mahatmya. And that will go for some, I think it's 15 verses or so, 12 or 15, maybe 13, 14, 15 verses, which present many of the glories of the name. So that will be where the discussion goes next. So, I'll leave it at that. Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah. Jai Shri Guru, Jai Shri Gaur, Jai Jai Shri Shri Radhe Shyam.
Jai
Shri Radhe Shyam.
Jai Pranam.
Jai.